Good afternoon, and welcome to the Licensing and Technology Transition series of TABC Talks. Today's presentation will focus on the application and approval process for temporary events for licensees and permittees and for nonprofit entities in the new Alcohol Industry Management System, also known as AIMS. My name is Sarah Fricke, and I am the Assistant Supervisor for the Austin area within the Licensing Division. Welcome, and let's get started. For an overview of our presentation today, we will discuss the following topics. We will discuss updates that occurred in both the Alcoholic Beverage Code and the TABC administrative rules for temporary events. We will review the new process for qualified license or permit holders to submit their request for an upcoming temporary event. And we will cover the new process for nonprofit entities to apply for a temporary permit. And lastly, we'll discuss additional information that is applicable to all or most temporary event requests. So let's begin with an overview of the legislative updates that will be effective on September 1st. These changes affect qualified permit holders, license or permit holders. Currently, if a qualified license or permit holder wants to hold an event away from their primary permitted premises, they would need to apply for a temporary permit, or they would need to hold a subordinate permit that would allow them to sell and provide service for alcoholic beverages away from their licensed premises. The good news is that for all of the below, or all of the license and permittees on the screen holders, starting on September 1st, you will no longer need to hold an additional subordinate permit or apply for and pay for a separate temporary permit to participate in a temporary event away from your primary licensed premises. So to reiterate, beginning on September 1st, all MB permittees, BG permittees, BE permittees, private clubs, and wineries will have the authority to participate in temporary events away from their primary premises. Now, for nonprofit organizations, prior to September 1st, nonprofits had 5 options available for participating in temporary events. Depending on the setup of the event, the type of charitable organization, or the type of alcoholic beverages that were sold or served at the event. The good news for nonprofit entities is that all of these various permits have been consolidated into one single permit, which is called the Nonprofit Entity Temporary Event Permit, or NETI permit. So the new temporary event rules can be found in the TABC Administrative Rules 33.70 through 33.79. These rules can be viewed on our public website, and they cover the new process for applying for a temporary event approval and to provide updates to accommodate the new consolidated licensing structure. We will discuss these rules as we move along through this presentation. You may be familiar with Marketing Practices Bulletin number 26, or MPB 026, which covers charitable, religious, or civic organizations that serve alcoholic beverages at fundraising events. At this point, I want to briefly mention that this Marketing Practices Bulletin will be updated to provide additional guidance for nonprofit entities. When those updates are available, they will be posted on our public website, so please watch out for those. Now, let's dive deeper into the new process for qualified license and permit holders. Again, just to reiterate, these are mixed beverage permittees, wine and malt beverage permittees, beer retailers, private clubs, and wineries. These permit holders will have the option for notifying the agency of a temporary event in 2 ways. Either the file and use notification, also known as FUN, or the temporary event approval, also known as a TEA. Starting on September 1st, there will be no initial fee for submitting either of these 2 options. So how long can your event be? There is a 2-day minimum for both TEA and FUN requests. And this is to account for the delivery of product and the setup and storage of the product both before and after the event. All right, so let's talk about the file and use notification, or again, the fun. If you are currently permitted and do not carry either a catering subordinate or a winery festival subordinate, you may not be familiar with the term file and use. File and use notifications were created to relieve the burden of having to apply for a temporary permit or a certificate request that didn't necessarily need to have separate authorization generated by TABC personnel. The easiest aspect of the file and use notification to remember and to learn, if you're not familiar with these before today, is that the standards for qualifying for file and use will not change on September 1st. The same standards that apply now will apply in September. So to qualify for a file and use notification, the following standards must be met. The wholesale value of the alcohol sold at the event must be less than $10,000. The attendance at the event must be estimated to be less than 500 people. The event must be private, meaning it is not open to the general public. The event must not be sponsored by a member of the wholesale or manufacturing tier. And the owner of the premise for the event location must authorize the sale or service of alcohol during that event. So how do you apply for a file and use notification? Starting on August 1st, the new forms will be posted on our website for you to download. The new form will have instructions on how to submit, which will be either via Ames or via email. It is important to note that if you are a current or new license or permit holder, you can only utilize Ames if you have onboarded. So until you do onboard, you will need to submit notifications via email. What's the fee for a file and use? There is no fee for a file and use submission if that event qualifies. I will mention here that if the file and use notification is submitted and found that it does not qualify, then that licensee or permittee will need to submit a temporary event authorization request, or TEA. And if that TEA is submitted less than 10 business days before the start date of the event, then a late filing fee will most likely be requested. But we will talk about late filing fees here in a moment. So record keeping for file and use notifications. They are found in Rule 33.76. What 33.76 says is that these records must be retained for a minimum of 4 years for each of the events and include supporting documents that are related to the event, such as invoices, the number of attendees, any agreements or contracts, and any kind of documentation that you may need to prove to the agency that the event was private, such as a copy of invitations. So let's talk about TEAs, or temporary event approvals. When the event does not qualify for the fund, say because the attendance is projected to be over 500 or it's a public event, a qualified license or permit holder must submit a temporary event approval request and will receive approval back from the agency. So unlike the file and use option, when applying for a TEA, the agency must approve and provide you with an approval to post at your event. How long can TEAs last for? They can last for up to 4 days. There are exceptions for this, but any request or exception must be submitted in writing to the agency prior to the event. To apply for a TEA, you will download the form from our website starting on August 1st, and you will submit either via email or log into Ames and complete the request online. Currently, there are no fees for TEAs. However, late filing fees may be applicable if the request is submitted less than 10 business days before the start date of the event. Record keeping. Record keeping for TEA requests is outlined in 33.78. And these requirements are the same as the records that must be kept for your primary permit, such as keeping invoices, receipts, sales data, etc. Now, let's talk about nonprofit entities. Events beginning on or after September 1st will use the organizations that meet section 30.01 of the Alcohol Beverage Code that can qualify for a nonprofit request are political action committees, religious organizations, nonprofits, charities, and civic organizations. These types of entities can apply for a nonprofit entity temporary event permit in short known as a NETI. A NETI permit is good for a minimum of 2 days and a maximum of 10 days. If your event is for more than 10 days, you may submit another NETI request. So if your event is, say, for 12 days, you could submit a 10-day request and then a 2-day request. To apply for this permit, you can download the form from our website and submit via email, or you can log into your AIMS account and submit and pay for your requests online. There is a fee for a NETI permit. That fee is $50 a day with a 2-day minimum for each request. And the maximum, of course, will be based on the number of days that your event is. Rule 33.78 outlines the requirements for applying for a nonprofit entity temporary event permit, and I encourage all nonprofits to review this rule and become familiar with its parameters. These parameters will be outlined on the form and on the instructions that will be available on our website. So how do you apply for a fund, a TEA, or a NETI? If you have an event beginning prior to September 1st, so the remainder of July and August of this year, you will use our current application process. For all events beginning on or after September 1st, you will utilize the new structure, new forms, and new submission process for applying for a temporary event. These new temporary event forms will be posted on our public website on August 1st so that everyone can avoid potentially having to pay late filing fees. License and permit holders who have onboarded may utilize AIMS to submit forms and applications starting on September 1st. Those who have not onboarded may submit their request via email until their scheduled onboarding date. And nonprofits may begin submitting requests via AIMS beginning on September 1st, or they may submit requests via email. While TABC administrative rule does allow for the submission of requests via email, submission through AIMS for all temporary events is the preferred method as it is more streamlined. Submission via email may delay review and approval of the permit. Currently, you may be familiar with a catering inbox for each region when submitting these types of requests. Effective on August 1st, there will be new email addresses for the submission of these requests, and those emails will be provided on the instruction forms. So, as promised, let's talk about late filing fees. Late filing fees you may currently know as expedited processing fees. Beginning September 1st, expedited processing fees will be known as late filing fees. Late filing fees are applicable to all temporary event approval requests and all nonprofit entity temporary event requests when they are submitted less than 10 business days before the start date of the event. I would like to repeat and stress that that is 10 business days prior to the start date of the event, not calendar days. If a request is not submitted prior to 10 business days, then the scale for accrued late fees is as such. So if you submit your request 7 to 9 business days before the event, you will have to pay an additional $300 late filing fee. If you submit your request 4 to 6 days before the event, you will need to submit an additional $500 late filing fee. And if your event, you submit the request 1 to 3 days before the event, you will need to submit an additional $900 late filing fee. A special note for nonprofits applying for the NETI permit, this late filing fee is in addition to the permit fee. So please be cognizant of your submissions to prevent accruing any late filing fees. So additional information that is applicable to all or most temporary events. If a location is issued a 2-year permit, any fund, TEA, or NETI permit that might have been issued to that same location will be automatically terminated. And the reverse is true for any license or permit holders. If your primary permit is expired, voluntary canceled, or under any sort of suspension for the temporary event, authorization will also become automatically terminated. It is important to know that delivery and storage must be accounted for when you're submitting a request. So for example, if you get delivery on a Thursday and your event begins on a Saturday, and you will still be there on Sunday to clean up for the event, then you would need to submit a request for 4 days to account for the delivery and storage both before and after the event. And lastly, this list is not exhaustive. As new administrative rules are enacted, our public website will be updated and additional guidance will be provided. So now we will take any questions that may have come in.
Back to that TEA slide.
Yeah. So let's go back to on a request through the TEA
I think
slide.
it was page 10.
Slide 11, Jeff. Yeah. So we had someone request to go back to the Netty slides, and here it is. And I do just want to mention that this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if anyone has any questions about recovering material, you can view this presentation on our YouTube channel after this. So one of the questions is, does the freeze on submitting new applications apply to temporary permits? No, it does not. So if you have a temporary event that starts in the month of August, you can still utilize the existing process to submit your requests. And if you have an event beginning in early September, our forms will be made available on August 1st, so you can download and submit those requests as well. So no, the pause for submitting applications is not applicable to temporary permits.
I'm going to read you some of the questions, okay?
Okay.
One of the questions says, this question is from Kenny Brown. Do the deadlines and late fees also apply to file and use?
No. So the question was, do late filing fees apply to file and use notifications or fund permits? No, they do not if that file and use event qualifies. So if you submit a file and use request and it's determined that it does not qualify because the estimated attendance is more than 500 people, and you as a permittee have to submit a TEA request. If that TEA request is submitted less than 10 business days prior to the event, then you will need to submit a late filing fee.
And we did go back to the TEA slide. That's the slide that they didn't see earlier.
Yeah, but the presentation will also be available on YouTube for review.
This is a question from Kyle Hill. So BGs, MBs, and other qualified permittees will all use the same process for temp authorizations, right?
Yes. So the main big change for existing permittees or any new permittees is that no additional subordinate permit needs to be held by permanent permittees. Instead, all mixed beverage permittees, all wine and malt beverage permittees, all beer retailers, all private clubs, and all wineries starting on September 1st will have the authority to participate in temporary events away from their licensed premises. So all of those permittees will utilize one of two options. They will submit either a fund request or a TEA request, depending on the parameters of that event.
Next question is from Mary. If our event is in early September, should the request be submitted by email?
Yes, if your event is going to be in early September, regardless of whether you are a nonprofit entity or you are an existing permittee, all of our forms will be made available on our website starting on August 1st for this new structure. And you can submit your request for all of September and on starting on August 1st. But it is important to note that requests should not be submitted more than 30 days before the start date of the event.
Question from Pamela. State Fair of Texas will be from September 25th to October 17th and is a public event. You only stated for private events. Will this be the same?
No. So for permittees, there are two options. So the question was,
It says that the Texas State Fair is from September 25th to October 17th and is a public event. You only stated for private events. Will this be the same?
yeah. So for permittees, you do have two options. You can either submit a fund request if your event is private, or if your event is public, you will submit the TEA request. So for events like State Fair that are public, if you're a permittee, you would submit the TEA request. If you're a nonprofit that is involved in the State Fair, you only have one option when applying for a temporary permit, regardless of whether the event is private or public, and that is to submit the NETI request.
We're on the TEA slide, right?
No, we're on the question side.
Okay. From Kyle. Question is from Kyle. One process for qualified private file and use events and another for non-qualified?
Correct. So for permittees, the question was, is there one process for private events, one for non-private events? So the answer is yes. It depends. So with file and use, all of those parameters must be met. So to qualify for a file and use, the wholesale value of the alcohol at the event has to be less than $10,000, and the attendance at the event must be less than 500 people, and the event must be private, and the event must not be sponsored by a member of the wholesale or manufacturing tier. If any of those things disqualifies you from submitting a file and use, then that permittee must submit the TEA request. So even if your event is private, but let's say 600 people are attending, then that permittee would submit the TEA request and not the FUN, because the qualifications and standards for qualifying for the file and use are not an or, they are an and. So all of those standards must be met, not just one.
Next question from Kimberly. That means no winery festival will ever be fun because they're always public?
We'll get back to you on an answer for that one, Kimberly.
Will all tent permits be MB permits?
No. So the way that the forms are set up is that you give us your primary permit number if you're a permittee. So anytime you participate in a temporary permit as a existing permittee or new permittee, every single law, rule, and regulation that applies to your primary permit applies to the temporary event. So if you are a wine and malt beverage permittee or a BG permittee, if you submit a temporary request, you could not sell distilled spirits at that event because your primary permit cannot sell distilled spirits. But for nonprofit entities on the application form, you will be authorized to sell whatever alcohol that location that you will be having the event is wet for.
Next question is from Mr. Dan Cassidy. If the event is public but held in the parking lot of our facility restaurant, will approval by the TABC be necessary?
So that depends on a couple of things. So the code defines a premises as all buildings and appendagers that are under the control of a permittee. So if that parking lot is not under your control, you may need to submit a request. But I would recommend that if you have situations like that you reach out to your regional office and ask to speak to a licensing supervisor who can kind of go over your options with you.
Next question is from Amy Harrison. What is the definition of business day?
So business days would be Monday through Friday when the agency is open and has not had prior notification that the agency is closed, and such things like holidays.
They're not seeing the TEA slide, they're saying. We're still not seeing the TEA slide presentation.
The TEA slide is up
Screen
on the
share.
screen right now.
Oh, okay, we're seeing it now.
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay. Doesn't look like we have any more new questions.
All right. Well, if no additional questions are coming through right now, then any questions that were not addressed today or you would like clarification on, please submit to stakeholder@tabc.texas.gov and we will get back to you. And we'll put that up on the screen right now so everyone has it. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.